Mr. Stevenson was a leading criminal lawyer. He wore 2 gold earrings in his left ear and was well known for representing clients involved in unusual cases.
This story has all the salacious details that newspaper editors just love. A prominent gay criminal lawyer, Darren Stevenson, shot in the back of the head.
The partially clothed body was frozen solid in a crouched position when police prized open the freezer about 5 o'clock last night. Detectives have been questioning a young man who was found in possession of the car.
That young man was Zack, Darren Stevenson's young lover. The jury finds him guilty of murder and he serves 14 years in prison. I think one of their motives, wasn't it, was that Darren's so tired of you, it was time to bring in a new boy. But there's one problem. For 40 years, David has insisted he didn't do it.
I did not kill Darren Stevenson. I played no part whatsoever in his murder.
Now he wants my help to clear his name, and it will lead me into a terrifying world of abductions, killings and cover-ups that go to the highest echelons of South Australia.
Darren Stevenson, but last time I saw him, he wasn't in a fit state to act for anybody.
As my investigation continues, I have some big questions about David's trial. What was it about him that you didn't like? Did you find him slippery?
I prefer the word difficult.
Just what is it that David's not saying? Do you think that Zack knows more than he's letting on?
Maybe. I actually think he's protecting someone.
Is the long-rumoured link between Darren Stevenson and the family murders really true? What happened to these boys is just a festering sore in this city. These people need to be exposed. And I learned the heartbreaking truth about my own partner's fate. I've always thought it was the most cowardly act to shoot a man in the back. When I began investigating David's case, he submitted himself to a lie detector test to prove his innocence.
I'm now going to get you to close your eyes for us, if you could, and just remember to answer each test question truthfully.
David passed with flying colours, but I'm really interested to see what criminal profiler Chris Illingsworth makes of his results.
Did you shoot Darren Stevenson? No. Do you know for sure who shot Darren Stevenson?
No.
Were you involved in hiding Stevenson's body in the freezer?
No.
What did you think, Chris?
Yeah, there was one thing that caught my eye there. I think it was question 3. He gives a negative answer verbally, but he actually nods in the affirmative.
Do you know for sure who shot Darren Stevenson?
No.
It's a contradiction. A nod of the head is generally accepted as a positive response to a question. So he's verbally contradicted himself with his own behaviour.
No.
How much store do you put in polygraphs?
Well, they're not accepted as evidence in Australia in criminal courts because they can be beaten. And they might have developed a way of believing what they're saying is truthful.
Which would make it incredibly unreliable because a lot of people in prison who believe their own story.
That's what they say.
What Chris has picked up supports my own suspicions that David knows a lot more than he's letting on. And could it have anything to do with word on the street that Darren was involved with something much more sinister?
Well, I think it was pretty well known. Darren's had some pretty rough mates. He was part of the initiation ceremony for the Barbarian motorcycle gang.
It's also equally consistent, if not more consistent, with being shot by a professional.
An execution?
Yes, an execution.
So while David waits to appeal his conviction, I've still got heaps of questions about the original trial.
Adelaide was a small town in '79 and Darren was an extremely popular lawyer. All these lawyers knew each other.
Elliot Johnson QC was David's senior counsel at trial. Now, he's since died, but his then junior, Kevin Borrick QC, has agreed to talk to me, but he's in his 80s and he's very unwell. How does it work when you and the senior counsel are close friends of the deceased and you have to defend the accused?
Someone had to defend Zack, and so we took on the job. The main part of my job was looking at the scientific evidence in that case and helping Elliot with trying to get sense out of Zack, which wasn't easy.
Did you like David, Zack?
I did not like him at all.
What was it about him that you didn't like? Did you find him slippery?
I prefer the word difficult.
What was Elliot Johnson's opinion about David Zack's guilt or innocence?
We both held the same view then as we held all along, that Zack wasn't telling us the whole truth.
The thing is, Kevin Borrick wasn't alone in thinking that David was holding something back. Even his own mother, during the trial, wrote very poignantly in her diary, David knows something, but is too frightened to say what it is. There has already been many threats against him. We don't know what those threats were. What is it that David's not saying? Was he trying to protect someone, and if so, who was that person? Did you go to the trial?
Every single day. Every single day.
What do you make of his defence team?
In my opinion, they were very laid back, and it was almost as if, let's get it over with.
Tell me about the phone calls you were getting overnight during the trial.
Yes.
And how many?
Well, two in particular that I remember very, very clearly. Very young voice, male voice, and this voice said, look, we're very sorry what's happening, but we'd like to help, but we just can't.
What do you think this young man meant?
He seemed to know something that he felt that, you know, we should have known to help. But I don't know, because it was never... I told the lawyers, but they just said, oh, people do these things. And
You're serious? Is that all they said?
Yeah.
They didn't attempt to trace the number?
No. No, just, oh, well, you know, people do these things, you know.
To not chase the mystery phone calls is one thing, but I've got bigger questions about the state's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Colin Manok. It was his bungled evidence that helped put David away.
What Dr. Manok did was use a formula which was not a formula that could be applied at all to a situation of a frozen body. He apparently just felt a compulsion to actually produce a result.
If I were asked about the reliability of the formula, I would have said, in my opinion, it's bullshit.
The fact of putting the body in a freezer was the distinguishing feature about the Zack case.
The partially clothed body was frozen solid in a crouched position when police prized open the freezer about 5 o'clock last night.
No one really was able to work out at that time how temperature loss would affect the time of death.
Tell me some of the problems there. I mean, for example, he took liver temperature rather than rectal temperature. Why was he not questioned more closely at the Zack trial, Kevin?
We knew he was incompetent, but we didn't know what a dreadful liar he was.
Even though it had been raised in the Supreme Court in the mid-70s and the Zack trial was 79.
No, in the Zack trial, we were looking at his competence more than his honesty.
And today, of course, we need to look at his competence and his honesty, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
In concert.
Yes.
Dr. Manok's evidence leads the jury to believe that Derrance is killed and his body placed into the freezer early in the evening, before David says he leaves for Coober Pedy. But in actual fact, for all anyone knows, it could have been hours later, which is why the timing of this case is so critical. There's one more person hired by the defence team I really want to talk to, Private Investigator Frank Church. After David's arrest, he travelled to Coober Pedy to trace David's every move.
We presumed he was innocent from the beginning until the first lie came out. He'd been trying to sell Darren Stevenson's opal ring. It was a very nice ring. I knew it was Derrance's favourite. It was always flashing off.
Why were you walking around Coober Pedy, which was known to be a pretty rough old town, with a thumping great ring like that on your finger?
I was just hamming it up. That's all. Just
were you showing off?
Of course I was showing off.
I know that I spoke to several dealers up there who told me that David was trying to sell the ring, right? Definitely trying to sell the ring. But when I came back to Adelaide, spoke to David, he denied that absolutely. And that's when your attitude starts changing.
Do you think it's possible that he wasn't actually lying, that he was just prancing around the town, you know, showing off a bit with Derrance's opal?
From my dealings with the dealers, it was a definite sale thing.
So how many murders had you done at that point as a PI?
I couldn't remember. I don't think I'd done any at that stage. I was still working my way. Up till 74, the only work we got was divorce work.
So are you saying then that Zack was your first murder case?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Well, Frank Church had a good reputation back in the day as a PI, but why would you send a guy who had never done a murder inquiry to cover one of the most sensational murder inquiries in South Australia's criminal history? In fact, Australia's criminal history. Lastly, there's one important character not called to David's trial. The bloke who was charged initially with being an accessory after the fact, Gino Gambodella. He walked at committal through lack of evidence. Then in 1980, Gino Gambodella skips the country, taking his 2 young kids with him, never to return.
Oh, I think Gambodella played a part in the murder. Yeah, that's my feeling when I've looked at the case very closely, and he's got a lot to answer for.
So you suggest that Gambodella should have been arrested and that should have stuck?
If he was an accessory, it should have stuck, but it didn't.
Why would Gambodella skip the country?
Because I believed that he was involved in the murder of Darren Stevenson, and he got out of the way because he was given the time to get out of the way.
Not only that, Gambodella took his 2 young kids without his wife's permission, leaving her completely devastated. If only I could speak with Gino Gambodella. Dr. Colin Manok is a name that comes up time and time again, but for all the wrong reasons. This is a pathologist whose evidence sent a man to prison whose conviction was later quashed, which begs the question, have the guilty also walked free? This flawed forensic evidence is the grounds for David's forthcoming appeal, that and the fact he isn't fully qualified.
The Institute of Medical and Veterinary Science, who employed Dr. Manok, but apparently they knew he actually wasn't qualified, particularly in histopathology, which is a fundamental aspect of being a forensic pathologist. That's using microscope to look at the tissues. But they were desperate to get somebody to do forensic pathology in South Australia.
Although Dr. Manok was a fellow of the Royal College of Pathologists in Australia, this position had in fact been gifted to him without the standard 5 years of study and examinations.
The human brain is like blancmange. It's very soft. and it's impossible to carve.
Recently, the Parliament of South Australia was advised that for Dr. Manok to state that he had the qualification of Fellow of the College of Pathology without further explanation was misleading. It also means he's unqualified to give evidence in court as an expert witness. At the time, Ken Thorson was the head of the Major Crime Squad and oversaw the police case against David. What did you make of Dr. Colin Manok?
Oh, I found Colin quite a gentlemanly doctor.
Mm-hmm. A good doctor?
Oh, a good pathologist. I think there's a bit of a... Well, I look at him a bit differently.
Do you still say that he's a good pathologist, Ken? I mean, there's been a lot of scuttlebutt about his history, hasn't there? His experience and qualifications.
Mm.
But you stand by him as a pathologist?
As a pathologist, yes.
Mm-hmm. And a gentleman?
And, well, he certainly was with me, yeah.
Let's look at two of the cases that Manok's bungled. 3 babies, he said, died of bronchopneumonia. In truth, each had injuries consistent with horrific child abuse. And there's Henry Keogh. Keogh was convicted for drowning his fiancée in the bath and served 20 years in prison. His conviction was recently overturned because Manok misinterpreted bruise marks on the body. But it's unlikely Dr. Manok will ever face the music. He's now elderly and very unwell. Consider that Manok has signed off on thousands of autopsies during his time. Surely it brings into question the entire forensic and legal systems in South Australia. But to really get a handle on Dr. Manok, you first really should meet his wife, Mistress Gabrielle. This is her website.
Just across the hall is my most amazing dungeon.
Wow. Yes, certainly stands out in a crowd, doesn't she?
She's a dominatrix, half his age. Doesn't leave a lot to the imagination, but her website is very comprehensive. If you just flick through...
Is that a chastity belt?
Well, it doesn't look like mine, but... I mean, it doesn't tell us much about Dr. Colin Manok as a pathologist, but it tells us a lot about him as a man.
Apparently, one of the rooms which she set up was an operating theatre.
This is what all those naughty little slaves are craving for, a real-life medical.
She bragged about how Colin had come along and shown her how to stitch people back up again when they'd had bits cut off, and he was, guiding her in what to do.
We can extract things from you.
Despite Dr. Manok's colourful private life and questionable forensics, that doesn't change the fact that Darren Stevenson still ended up in the freezer with a bullet to the back of his head. And I still have doubts about David's version of events on the night of the murder, especially the contradictory times given by witnesses at Port Wakefield, 100 k's north of Adelaide, where David stopped for fuel. Because David's guilt or innocence all comes down to timing. What time do you say you arrived in Port Wakefield that night in 1979?
Certainly before 10 p.m.
And what time does the service station attendant say you got here?
Just after midnight.
I really need to speak to those witnesses, but 40 years is a long time. I've just found out that one of them has since died, but I've managed to track down the other. After giving it a lot of thought, Arthur Mader has agreed to talk to me. It's the first time he's spoken publicly about what happened that night. Hi, Arthur.
G'day.
Come in. How do you remember things from that night with such clarity?
It was just a little bit of a different night. As far as the vehicle, there was very few of those vehicles that came through Port Wakefield.
What sort of car was it?
Datsun 260Z. So, yeah, that made it very, very easy to remember. It's not the sort of vehicle you took into the country. The other part that, you know, that sort of sticks in my mind is a particular ring that we seen on that night.
What sort of ring was David wearing?
It was a very large opal ring.
And did you and your colleague, Robin Kelly, did you have a conversation about that ring?
Robin made a comment, "Did you see the ring on that bloke's finger?" I said, "Yeah." Another little rich boy, Daddy probably gave him the car as well.
So just a spoiled brat.
Mm-hmm.
What time do you say it was that you saw David Zack leave the service station at Port Wakefield that night?
I would put the time somewhere around between, say, 10 past and 25 past 12.
How long would it have taken in those days, uninterrupted, to drive from Adelaide to Port Wakefield at night?
I would expect, under normal driving conditions, without it being in a hurry, we used to allow about 60 minutes an hour, was normal.
Why are you talking to me today, Arthur?
If, for some reason or another, this man hasn't committed the crime that he's been accused of, then if I can play a part in clearing him, then so be it.
Final question, Arthur. Will you meet David Zack?
Would I? Certainly.
Good. Arthur's evidence is really important. It means David could have been at the house for hours longer than he says. And he may even have been the mystery man picked up by the cabbie just after 11 p.m. What was in the garbage bag?
Nobody knows.
What was in the attaché case?
Nobody knows.
To make it in the 40-minute time frame put forward by the Crown, David had to drop off the evidence, pick up the Datsun, drive like a bat out of hell through to Port Wakefield in time to get fuel just after midnight. It's unlikely, but not impossible, and it's no doubt something the jury took into account when they were considering their verdict. The jury wasn't out very long, were they, in those days? It was very decisive.
I think it was, what, 3 or 4 hours, was it? It was a relatively quick, short time for a murder verdict.
I think for a moment my heart would have probably stopped, I don't know, but because my counsel's telling me the worst case scenario would be they wouldn't be able to reach a verdict.
Did David Zack's counsel, Elliot Johnson, did he say anything to you after the guilty verdict came in?
Yes. Said you feel like a beer.
Did he?
And I said, yeah, you got me. And he said to me, he said, well, you don't want to lose any sleep over this one, Ken. He said, I think the jury have got this one right.
The man convicted was David Zack, jailed for life for shooting his gay lover in the back of the head.
I wish to God they had proven to me beyond any shadow of a doubt that David was guilty. And I would have still felt the same toward him. He would have still been my son. I would have still loved him just the same with no hesitations. And I think life would have been a lot better in my mind anyway.
David and I do share something in common, yeah. We both had partners who were murdered. What drove me to keep looking for Ron? Love. Love, obsession, determination, a bit of bravery, a lot of stupidity. Right from the beginning, I suspected that a guy called Stephen, who had owed Ron $8,000, was involved somehow in his disappearance. So we'd gone through winter, we'd gone through spring, we'd gone through Christmas, and we're into a new year. By this stage, I have lost so much weight that there's nothing left of me. I couldn't eat. Sorry. I got a phone call from Ron's brother-in-law saying they found a body in the bush, Debi.
What a shocking, bloody, lonely, desolate, godforsaken joint.
The police took a little while to identify him because he was skeletal. By then he'd been left out in that lonely bush. But there was the one thing that they could identify was a pair of shoes, which had holes in it. It was his favourite sand shoes. And I guess that was Standage's hope, that there would be nothing, you know, the bush had done its work. I was decimated. I remember sliding down the kitchen wall and Louise coming out, saying, "You all right, Mummy?" Oh, sorry.
I've always thought it was the most cowardly act to shoot a man in the back. I feel I loved him, though.
I know. When most prisoners are found guilty, they just accept their fate and quietly get on with serving time. Not David. On the inside, he never stops writing to anyone he thinks will listen. The Legal Services Commission, the Department of Public Prosecutions, the media, anyone who may review his case. How did you cope in prison?
I don't think I really coped. I just kept to myself. As best I was able.
Did you have sexual relationships in prison?
No, definitely not. Jeez.
Not with anyone?
No.
Here you are, a young, good-looking, by your own account, slim young man in a male prison, and you're telling me for 14 years that you would never... I really need to talk to someone who knew David on the inside. The good news is I found a former inmate, but he'll only talk to me on the condition of complete anonymity. When you met David Zack in prison, what did you make of him? What sort of bloke was he?
He was guarded.
Still is. Why?
I don't know. He's gay and he's in prison. It's pretty tough, but he's been there for a long time. Everybody knows what he is and what he's there for.
Do you think that David Zack knows more than he's letting on?
Maybe. I actually think he's protecting someone.
Okay, what do you think David Zack knows that he's not telling me?
Probably who did it.
Do you think he helped put the body in the freezer?
No. He loved the guy. And I mean, it wasn't a crime of passion, right? You don't murder your partner and put them in the freezer.
Well, you lived on the streets. What sort of crime was it? How would you describe it?
A hit. I think that body was put in that freezer to set him up.
Who do you think did it?
Be honest, I think it was one of his clients.
What about Gambodella?
Yeah, very likely. Very likely to be on the list of people that could be possibly the person who did it.
Could it be that David's really protecting Derrence's close friend? Criminal profiler Chris Illingsworth has been scrutinising every fragment of David's life leading up to the murder and his likely state of mind.
It looks like everything's building up almost like a volcano ready to erupt.
19, gay relationship with an older man, clearly wasn't working all that well by 1979. And also dependent on Darren.
Well, he's fully dependent on him for food, shelter, a house, work, a job that he got for him, money, and all of that added up to his lifestyle. And he's totally disempowered.
Okay.
When you're so reliant on someone, you don't have control over those things.
So lack of money leads to what?
Yeah, lack of money means he's dependent on Darren and on any other source that he can get his hands on. There could be some criminal activity perhaps in his background that we don't know of yet.
His birthday was really interesting.
So just about 10 days before the murder was David Zack's 19th birthday. For that occasion, apparently Darren gave him absolutely nothing, which is interesting because 1 year earlier when he turned 18, Darren gave him a beautiful gold necklace, gold chain. So that indicates there's a shift in their relationship where Darren is no longer perhaps as engaged as he was with David.
Also, there was a shift in his parents' relationship.
Yeah, his mother left, which would have been a big blow, I'd say, for David. You know, the family unit breaking up.
What about Gambodella?
Yeah, it was like, I guess it was the third wheel. Gambodella and Darren had a close relationship socially, and from what I've been reading, it seems like David Zack was not liked by Gino.
So David didn't like Gino, Gino didn't like David?
Yeah, that's what it seems to be. There seems to be a bit of friction between the two of them.
So friction equals tension, and it's just building and building and building. So, Chris, it seems that he was completely disempowered by this stage, but he had one thing up his sleeve, didn't he?
He did. He had knowledge. Knowledge was his power over Darren's. Because of Darren's nefarious activities, even though he's so disempowered with all the other things going on, that was his one power lever.
Although David says he kept to himself in prison, he did in fact begin another relationship with a supporter on the outside. When we meet, Trish is recovering from surgery to remove a nasty throat cancer which affects her speech. How did you meet David?
I had actually followed his case in the paper when he was at trial, and so I wrote to him and just wished him well, and yeah, he wrote back, and then we just sort of wrote backwards and forwards, and then
he had a day leave at his parents' home. He wrote to me and mentioned that and that he would like to meet me, and I was quite willing to meet him. So I did. I went up there and I just came away with the impression that he was a very nice person. He had a lovely family.
Was there a romantic spark there, or?
Not for me, not at the beginning, no.
How did David feel about you? Was it the same?
Yeah, but he was a bit quicker than me.
Was he?
Find me a church.
After serving 14 years behind bars, David says he was kicked out of prison. In fact, under new legislation, the parole board released David early. Then, on the outside, David and Trish's relationship stalled. They separated and David fathered 2 sons with another woman. When that relationship also failed, he and Trish got back together again. What's the basis of your union? What keeps you together?
Now it's companionship. And I just think there's a very deep connection there through all that we went through together when he was in prison and everything I did outside of prison to help.
Trish started to forensically work her way through the evidence, and she figured that something wasn't right on the night of the murder. When David stopped again for fuel here at Kingunya, which is a remote town, at least a 5-hour drive from Port Wakefield. In the chilly pre-dawn darkness, 3 witnesses saw David pull up. A bus driver, a truckie, and the owner of this now abandoned roadhouse, Mrs. Fox. There are 4 differences in time. There's yours, there's a bus driver, there's the truck driver, there's Mrs. Fox. Just take me through each one of those. Tell me the times. Truck driver says what time?
4:30.
Bus driver says?
Bus driver was never called to give evidence.
Mrs. Fox, who gave you the petrol?
Yeah, she's saying around 5 because she noted the presence of a bus.
And what time do you say?
Well, I've got to work on the basis of what the 2 witnesses had said about 4:30.
Now, the bus driver who didn't give evidence carried the overnight mail to Adelaide. Being a Royal Mail bus meant he had to keep to a really strict timetable. So Trish decided to investigate.
No one asked for a bus timetable. I did, and it showed that David couldn't have been there at the time that they said he was there, because the bus wasn't there at that time.
The timetable has the bus arriving at Kingunya at 3:15 in the morning and leaving 30 minutes later, placing David at the Roadhouse at least an hour earlier.
The timing's all wrong. It's all out.
So if that was wrong, are you suggesting that all the times were wrong?
It cast reasonable doubts on the prosecution case.
So if Trish is right, it's pretty unlikely that David could have driven from Port Wakefield to Kingunya, that's more than 500 k's, in just 3.5 hours. Meaning David must have left Adelaide when he said he did to be at Port Wakefield by 10 p.m. That's 2 hours earlier than what Crown witness Arthur Mader says. Arthur, I'd like you to meet David.
David, how are you?
It's been a long time, hasn't
Yes,
it?
it has.
Nearly 40 years.
A long, long time ago. Yeah.
How's life been for you?
It's been okay.
Been okay.
What about you, David? How's life been for you?
Very iffy.
Yeah, not so good.
Not so good, very iffy, but still. I was thinking about the speeds you gave in evidence at the trial.
Yes.
Okay, you know what your evidence did for us?
I've got no idea.
It got us from Adelaide to Port Wakefield in 40 minutes. At night.
Yep.
Approaching speeds of 100 miles per hour.
Yeah, well, that would have been about right, though.
Well, your evidence was, here comes a joker, comes flying in, nearly bowls over a petrol pump.
No, that's not my evidence at all. At the end of the day, they came to me and said, did this vehicle pull up on the driveway on this particular date?
Yeah.
Right. I said, yes, I believe that vehicle was there on this particular date. Yeah. And the only other thing that I told them that I could remember at that particular time was an opal ring that you was wearing.
No, the difficulty I have is that the evidence given was that you were serving petrol.
No, I wasn't.
Well, it gets a bit difficult there. In evidence, we've got you serving a vehicle.
No, because I was out in the back office.
We'll check the transcript on this.
I'd finished my shift. I wouldn't have been out there.
Okay, well,
yeah.
So, David, are you angry with Arthur?
I'm not so much angry with Arthur. I'm more angry by the fact that Arthur's saying that he wasn't in the driveway.
I wasn't on the driveway. I was out the back in the back office.
We'll have to check that. The difficulty I have is that the evidence given was that you were serving petrol.
When David met Crown witness Arthur Mader, none of us expected such a heated reaction. The really important thing about this interaction between Arthur Mader and David is, one, David is furious. You can clearly see he's really angry, so we're not seeing the meek and mild David Zack anymore. Two, it's about timing. Arthur Mader says that he could drive from Adelaide to Port Wakefield in 40 minutes. Now, if that's the case, and David would understand this, then that theoretically puts David at the murder house at 11 p.m. that night. The other thing is it goes to memory. So Arthur stands firm to David and says, mate, I didn't serve you at the pump.
I wasn't on the driveway. I was out the back in the back office.
But I saw you with this big thumping ring on.
The only other thing that I told them that I could remember at that particular time was an opal ring that you was wearing.
David says I wasn't wearing the ring, so transcript's got to be checked on that to see who was right. But either way, if Arthur is wrong, then it goes to the question of memory. And if David's wrong, it goes to the question of David's reliability.
This is the testimony that Arthur gave at the trial.
So we're going way back in time here. So this is on the evening of Monday, the 4th of June.
Did you see another vehicle enter the service station while you were still there?
Yes, a 260Z Datsun.
Aha, okay. Did you see any jewellery on the accused that night?
No. So David's right. No wonder he's so furious. It seems Arthur's memory is confused with the testimony of his mate, Robin Kelly, who did say he recalled David wearing a ring. Arthur, in their interaction, was so clear that he was. So what does that say, Chris?
Well, it shows quite clearly that memory is fallible. Plenty of studies have shown that memory is notoriously unreliable. Every time memory is accessed, so you talk about an event or somebody asks you something, you're accessing your memory. Every time it's accessed, it's contaminated. And so we have 40 years of contaminated memory.
The problem I've got is I'm so bamboozled now, so many stories from different people about the night of the murder that I need to actually try to get to the heart of it. Like a lot of journos in this town, I've been trying for ages to get my hands on the archival material left behind by investigative journalist Dick Wley when he died. He worked almost exclusively for a while on the Darren Stevenson murder, and by all accounts, he's got boxes and boxes of material. Now, after 40 years, it's been given to us by someone who wishes to remain anonymous. So it's everything that he kept during his lifetime as a journalist, but he hasn't put them into any order. There must be hundreds of newspaper clippings here, many written by Dick himself. There's his original typed stories, interview recordings, even hand-scrawled notes.
It says, Dick, watch your back.
Wow. God, he could be here for weeks. Who wrote this? Oh, here we are, Jess. Mr. Stevenson's body with a bullet in his head was found jammed into a deep freeze at his Parkside home. Did he write this? Maybe. His killer, David Joe Zack, was later sentenced to life imprisonment.
What a great picture. What's this? Oh, Deb. Deb. What is this?
The man now, is that 31? Was the teenage lover of a still-serving magistrate who has previously been linked with the family. Who's the person they're referring to? Mark.
I've got nothing against guys going to bed with guys. I've been there, done that. Killing young blokes is a different matter.
This is like a story from the grave. I've got goosebumps. Wouldn't be Mark Lawrence, would it? Is it possible, Jess? David talks about. Mark Lawrence, who could have been Derrence's former lover, phoned the house at 20 to 5 in the hours before the murder.
Mark was introduced to the homosexual scene by chiropractor Gina Gambodella.
There you go. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. Who introduced him to lawyer Darren Stevenson? Yes.
I lived with Stevenson at his home for about 3 months. I had just come back to Adelaide. I was broke and needed a place to stay. As a lawyer, he was friendly and charming. We always had a good time.
I bet they did.
I was right into cooking and his place was excellent for cooking. Yeah.
This is the same story that David tells, isn't it, Jess?
Yeah.
Darren Stevenson, the benefactor, the friend, the chef, the mentor.
Zack screamed that he didn't kill Derrence. He was too meek and mild.
I don't know who did it. If Derrence was in the family, he could have had an argument with them and they could have done it. The family. Is it possible, really, that Derrence was involved with the family? Remember that just weeks after he was murdered, the first family murder victim, Alan Barnes, was found under the bridge.
Perhaps the most disturbing pattern of murders which has emerged over the last few years is the brutal murder of young men whose bodies have been found sexually mutilated.
The so-called family murders are amongst the most depraved crimes ever committed in Australia. And disturbingly, the article links them to both Darren Stevenson and Gino Gambodella.
Peter, I've been a crime journalist for a long, long time, but the family murders are just something out of the box, aren't they?
Well, they are, and it was journalists that brought it out of the box, and it was the public that made it bigger. 1979 to 1983 they occurred. 5, we used the term young men. It took a little while for the police to get on to connecting them, and they did that through 2 or 3 pieces of evidence. Drugs that was found in the bodies, the very unique injuries, and the method that was used to actually abduct the men.
The smoking gun that connects Darren Stevenson to the family is the young man who turned up at the Legal Services Commission the day after Darren's murder. When he was asked if he'd seen Darren, he said, "Yes, I saw him last night, but he was in no fit state to act for anybody." That young man is widely believed to be Alan Barnes. Now, his body turned up 3 weeks after Darren's murder. It's believed that he was the first known victim of the so-called family murders.
Barnes' body was discovered an hour's drive from Adelaide under this bridge at the South Para Reservoir.
There's another extraordinary connection to this story. When David's childhood friend Mark Smith visited him in prison, Mark had a very important question to put to him.
I just asked him the question, "Dave, did you kill Darren?" And David said to me, and I can't remember the name, but if they find this other boy, it'll put a completely different light on the case or the story. And from what I understand, he was found dead a short time later under a bridge. He told me that boy then ends up dead, and I thought he's taken the rap for this to safeguard himself, as far as I was concerned.
Taking the rap for whom?
Whoever he was involved with. You know, whether he knew who the murderer was, whether it be the organisation or the family or whoever they were. I was convinced he was just taking the rap because he didn't want to be killed.
These are stunning things you're telling me, Mark. If I said the name Alan Barnes...
I recall that name, definitely.
How do you know Alan Barnes was known to Darren's?
Because he was known to Gino Gambodella.
But how does that...
Well, at the time when Gambodella met Alan Barnes had a rape charge hanging over him. So we would assume that Gambodella would have, said, "Well, I know a lawyer who can help you out."
David, do you understand this is the first time you've told me this and we've been talking for a long time?
No, I've always said that Alan Barnes was the alleged first victim of the family murders, and it's so coincidental that Darren was murdered in the first week of June, and Alan Barnes, I think, was in the last week of June.
David, every time I talk to you, you seem to profess that you don't have a clue who would have murdered Darren Stevenson, but you've had years and years and years to think about it.
Indeed, I'm told it was a family killing, that Darren was a member of the family.
Who told you that?
Well, that's just something we put 2 and 2 together.
Who put 2 and 2 together?
Well, the media.
Police now believe they were all committed by the same people, a small group of violent homosexuals who, despite police suspicions, remain tantalisingly out of reach of the law. They've been dubbed the family.
The media was saying that the family comprised a group of Adelaide professionals, engaged in, devious homosexual activities with young males.
And?
Well, Darren was a lawyer. He was sort of, with boys. Is that what he wanted to get out of?
Everybody in Adelaide had a theory. Some were prominent people, others were street people, some were transgender people, others were sadistic murderers.
Despite multiple people's involvement with the family, only one person has ever been convicted for just one murder, a man named Bevan Spencer von Einem. To this day, the other 4 murders remain unsolved. But here's the thing. All these years later, the identities of the other key suspects are still protected under court suppression orders.
It's a story you're not going to be able to tell because you're not going to get the information or nobody's going to publish it. It involves a cover-up. It involves things being hidden. It involves certain people's reputation.
What happened to these boys is just a festering sore in this city. These people need to be exposed. I don't care if they're dead or alive. I don't care who they are. What they did was absolutely depraved and debauched, and they have got away with it for decades. As my investigation continues, will these victims' families ever get the justice they deserve?
I want to be able to say, these people, you did this to these boys. Because only one person's been convicted of him, only one, and there's a lot more involved.
A rare insight into one of Australia's most depraved killers.
I could hear Bevan and Dennis giggling and laughing, both saying, oh, how evil, it's evil.
What is the menacing new twist to Darren Stevenson's late-night activities?
Darren Stevenson was actually done over because he was blackmailing.
And the Hollywood-style sting to catch my own partner's killer. So what you have is undercover coppers setting up this psychopath who thinks he's more clever.